I'm going to have to do better than that, which is a hard deal to follow. All right. We're going to go to Psalm chapter 139. Psalm 139. Tonight, as we continue on in our Engaging the Culture series, we talk about colliding with abortion. We have dealt with several different subjects in several different places, several different things. And so tonight we reach this subject, the subject of abortion, which is a subject that is strange in its nature, strange in its makeup. We did not have the kind of collision with this particular subject before 1973. Roe versus Wade is that landmark Supreme Court decision that sort of changed the way that we engage this particular topic. And I think it's important to notice that. When we looked last week, one of the things we talked about in terms of racial tensions was that we had some sanctity of life questions that we felt like we needed to ask in order to get a handle on just who we are as Christians and how we approach things. And one of those was what makes a person a person. The other was what gives a person value. We call those sanctity of life questions because it's not just about questions we ask about someone who is from a different ethnicity than we are. It has to do with the very basis of how we see human life. What defines what a person is. In Roe versus Wade, the subject of abortion fell under the idea of a woman's right to privacy. And so it wasn't an issue that was decided on morality. It wasn't an issue that was decided on the idea of right or wrong in terms of the act that was happening. It wasn't really, when you go back and read the decision and read the opinion, something that really dealt with a whole lot of anything except for a woman has a right to privacy, to go into a room with a doctor and make decisions about whether or not she'll have an abortion. So in the intervening years, that particular decision has morphed and has grown and has changed, and it has affected a lot of things, because in abortion circles you begin to ask things like, what makes a person a person? And because for Roe versus Wade, what a baby is, a fetus is, a prenatal baby is simply a blob of tissue that a woman and her doctor get to make decisions about. What makes a person a person? Well, Roe versus Wade said in private we can decide whether this blob of tissue lives or dies based on how it's formed and whether or not it's formed in a way that I can support, whether or not it's formed in a manner that I can support, whether or not it's economically feasible for me, whether or not it brings something. What gives a person value? See, the heart of sanctity of life questions are to understand what life is and to understand why life has a sanctity, why it has a holiness about it. Because we are created in the image of God, because we are created, because we have a certain amount of value because of who God is and what our Creator has invested in us. Roe versus Wade changed the subject from is it moral or is it ethical to is it economical or is it convenient? Is it real? Is it a life? Is it a person? Does it have value? It changed he or she to it. And we talk about that in terms of folks. When we talked last week about racial tensions, I said one of the dangerous places to be is to be in a place where we think us and them. See, them as nameless, faceless people over there, right? We do the same thing when we talk about abortion, is when When a person becomes simply an it, then they become an object. They become expendable. They become unimportant in the grand scheme of things. And in talking about abortion, we talk about all of those things. But when we talk about abortion, we have to talk carefully about abortion. When we deal with abortion in the U.S., there are three major groups that track how legal abortions are done and how many are done. Those three places are the CDC, the Guttmacher Institute, and the Harris Organization, which has tracked abortion since 1973. Now, the problem with the three of these is that they all carry with them a problem, whether the problem be a bias or something else. So you see CDC has a minus there, right? We're going to look at CDC statistics tonight. And the reason we're going to is because of the minus. CDC takes voluntarily submitted state data, okay, on how many legal abortions they performed. But here's the problem, it's voluntary. So California, Maryland, and New Hampshire have never submitted a single number to the CDC. And by their own recollection, never will. All right? So we're automatically from 50 states to 47, right? So we don't have those numbers. New Jersey and D.C. only submit partial numbers because internally in their places, in their state or in their district, they don't demand that everybody submits numbers. And so we know from the very outset the numbers are short. Now, we also know that at various times throughout the years, a variety of states haven't submitted numbers. We forgot, we just didn't decide to do that, it was COVID, whatever it is. We're not going to deal with COVID years. But you understand the deal. Some states just didn't submit numbers. So the CDC's numbers are always lower than anybody else's, okay? And I want to acknowledge that freely tonight. The CDC's numbers are always lower, and we're going to take the low number, okay? Guttmacher is always higher because Guttmacher takes the CDC numbers and look at those, and then they ask for states to give information, and they make phone calls, and they follow up in places, but they only do that for 2 years, and then they skip a year. And then they do 2 more years, and they skip a year. And they do 2 more years, and they extrapolate the data out for the third year based on what they got the first 2 years, and figuring that the CDC is always going to be low, they kind of twist it. So Guttmacher is always higher than the CDC, but only usually by about 2 or 3 percentage points. The Harris Organization, I just can't make heads or tails of their info. So they have their own problems. But so we're gonna deal with the one that's lowest because the low numbers are shocking enough to deal with. But I do want you to understand that there is already a bias in that place. We're going to deal with 2013 to 2018. In 2013, there were 654,458 babies aborted. In 2018, there were 619,591. So more than 500,000. And while the number is less in 2018 than it was in 2013, it is more than 500,000 is what the CDC reports every year. Now, if you pick up popular literature, you could find that number to be anywhere up to 1.5 million, which is hard to understand. How what should be a simple number that you can count, it gets so distorted. But things that run in these circles, it's hard to figure out what to believe. When we deal with abortions by age group, it's not a surprise that those that are aged 20 and under constitute 9% of abortions that happen every year in the United States. Ages 20 to 29 constitute 58%. Before you go any further, we're at 2/3 already, aren't we? 2/3 of abortions that happen in the United States happen before a woman is 30 years old. The other third happens between the time that they're 30 and 39. Okay? There is a small percentage of those over 40. When we talk about general abortion statistics, 85% of those who have abortions are unmarried. So start to think through. young, unmarried, make this decision. 92% of abortions happen in the first 13 weeks. And part of that has to do with Roe versus Wade. Later term abortions have always been controversial. But anything ought to be questionable. But 92% in the first 13 weeks. Less than 1.5% of abortions are specifically tied to some sort of abuse, whether that be rape or incest or sexual abuse by somebody else. Less than 1.5%. From 1973 to 2018, the CDC reports 41 million plus abortions. The number is huge. The number is one that makes you stop and go, I don't even know how to show you that in something that's understandable. It's a major number. We look at 6 million Jews in the Holocaust and we can't fathom that. 41 million abortions since 1973. Roe versus Wade made that legal. They made it in such a way that we think about it differently. But again, I want us to understand that as we talk about it, the understanding is that if we look at the numbers, you'll see figures like 1 in 4 women will have an abortion. 25% of women will have an abortion. I think that's a little high, but take that number, take 1 in 5, take 1 in 6. I don't care what the number is. There's still a large number of folks from 1973 who have made a decision based on what the court in the United States has said. If the church is what the church ought to be, and that is a body that reaches into the world and helps the hurting and helps the healing come away from the world and into the church, then in our pews, 1 in 7 or 1 in 8 women have at some point in time maybe made the decision. I don't know who in here has and who in here hasn't. But I would imagine that because of the way that it has worked in our country, that we deal with far more people who have been awfully close to abortion than we would ever realize, than we would ever know, because it has become a staggering number. And that while it is something we look at and go, it is an abomination, it is something that's very real in our world. The world will tell us all kinds of things about abortion. We start, as we've always started, with the cultural lies. One, life begins at birth. That the viability of life only happens when a baby can actually take care of itself independently on its own, right? This is where we get into all those definitions of a fetus. Is it tissue? Is it a person? Is it this? Is it that? Is it the other? Is it... by the very looks at it, you've got to look at this and go, we've got to understand just by common sense that the idea of life begins at birth does not work. Let's just ask the question. How different is a child 1 minute after birth versus the child 1 minute before birth? What's the difference? Really nothing, right? So to say that a child is everything that needs to be human 1 minute after birth means that everything that it takes to be human was there 1 minute before birth. Was it there 10 minutes before birth? Was it there a day, a week, a month? The idea of life begins at birth doesn't work. When a child can take care of itself, can function on its own, that's when it's viable for life. How many of you have children that are able to take care of themselves entirely, and they're like 14? I got a 14-year-old, so I asked the question. No? How about those of you who have a 16-year-old? Are they viable then? No? 18? 20? Maybe. I get a maybe at 20. So we're going to say sold right there. We'll hit the gavel. 20. Right? What would happen if we said we think that abortion rights ought to happen up until the time that they're 20? mean, we laugh. Viability of life. When does a child truly take care of itself? Is life more than the ability to breathe? Is life more than the ability to vocalize something? Is life more than simply the ability to lay on a table and exist? See, when we begin to define what is a person, we have to go beyond this idea of life begins at birth. That is a lie that we're told to excuse behavior that is unacceptable to God, that does not belong in our culture and shouldn't exist in our hearts. It is a place that just doesn't work. It is a lie. Abortion is necessary in cases of sexual abuse. For me personally, this is the hardest one to answer, and I'm going to tell you right now what my answer to this one is. Abortion is wrong. Abortion is sin. Okay? So even though I look at this and go, my heart hurts for women who have been put into a situation that is so obviously unbearable, I cannot justify abortion. I cannot look in the text and see any place that says, we're going to wink our eye at this one, or we're going to turn our back on that. I can't do it. If abortion is wrong, then it is wrong. And there has to be another answer to this one. But I didn't put myself in this situation. She didn't do anything wrong. She didn't do anything, and that's true. And I think that one of the things we have to understand is that a child is not a punishment. Now, I understand how we get there, but a child is not a punishment. A child is not God getting back at you or some cosmic whatever getting back at you. A child is a blessing. And while that's hard to see in some circumstances, that's part of the answer that has to be delved in that place. Third one, abortion is humane in the face of known birth defects. My child has an illness. My child will not live long. My child will be in some way deformed. It will have a syndrome. It will have that will make it hard all the way through life. And so this is humane and merciful to do this. I don't have any problem with this one. That's flat out wrong. No one gets to decide when somebody else has the right to live. And they just don't. You don't get to judge the entirety of a person's life based on one thing in their life that we would say is abnormal or that we would say is hard, right? I mean, I'm going to tell you right now, I come from a family where babies have big heads and they're fat, okay? And they grow up to be 50-year-old men who have big heads and are fat. And they die with big heads and fat. And okay, do I get a chance to live? I should, right? See, we don't get to decide based on what we like or what a cultural standard is or what we think is good or what we think is life is life is life. And the sanctity of life says there's more to a person than simply the makeup of their body, right? We had this discussion last week. Number 4, abortion is about a woman's right to privacy, a right to choose, or control over her own body. That's what Roe versus Wade said. It said she has a right to choose. But what happens then in that place? What happens is we have to redefine what life is and what life is not. A woman has the right to choose. The woman can go in, sit with the doctor and say, I don't want this child. Can we decide to abort this baby? And the doctor says, sure. And that's all of the decision that it takes. We don't have to delve whether it's whatever. See, it's her right to choose what happens to her body. I'm going to tell you right now, I agree with that statement right there 100%. I just don't think she gets to choose for the baby. If she doesn't want to risk a child, she chooses not to have sex until she's ready to have a child. Those two things go together, right? That's what we need to be teaching our kids. If you're not ready for a baby, if you're not ready to raise children, if you're not ready to commit to a lifelong relationship with another person, if you're not ready to walk in, then you are not ready to have sex. It is not recreational. It is not some form of relaxation. It is not something that's social. It is an absolute commitment. A woman's right to choose exists. She can choose to say no. But she doesn't get to redefine life. And she doesn't get to call a baby a parasite. And she doesn't get to call a fetus simply tissue. Why? Because God has ordained something different in that place. See, when we go back to the wonder of God's story, we come back to Psalm 139. Let's go down to verse 13. It says here, David is writing, "For you formed my inward parts, you knitted me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works, my soul knows it very well. My frame is not hidden from you when I was being made in secret, intricately woven in the depths of the earth." When David talks about life, what does he talk about? He says that life began at conception. I was knit together in my mother's womb, that you knew me. You knew who I was. That God saw at conception an individual being knit together in their mother's womb. That God saw an individual that was there. If you go to Jeremiah 1:5, he will talk about the same thing, about the fact that he has purpose, that he was called to be a prophet in the womb. If you go to Luke chapter 1, it says that John the Baptist in the womb of Elizabeth leapt when Jesus in the womb of Mary came close. That there was recognition of one being to another, a recognition of the Messiah before he was born. That he had a role, he had a purpose, he had a life, that he was human in those moments. That what God says is that life doesn't begin at birth, life begins at conception. And it's that point in time that you can no longer choose to say no to that life. Now you become a mom. And we're going to stop for just a second. And guys, you become a dad. You have a responsibility. Whether that child grows in your body or not, and it doesn't, you have a responsibility there. You don't get to walk away. Two people that were something else are now a mother and a father, and your choices will forever change. And you give up self, and you give up a lot of stuff to be a parent. It is the most rewarding thing there is. It is the most frustrating thing that there is at days. But it doesn't give you the right to go, my son's going, what? I got a list. I want it alphabetically, chronologically, or as it comes into my head. I want it, no, I'm messing with Walker. But you become a parent. That's what you've chosen. That's what's there. But God is very clear in the fact that life begins at conception. If we go to Deuteronomy chapter 24, we go way back to the law of Moses, and there's an interesting thing we talk about. Jesus will do this in talking about sin and a millstone, but for Moses in chapter 24, verse 16, it says, when you make your neighbor, that's verse 10. Fathers shall not be put to death because of their children, nor shall children be put to death because of their fathers. Each one shall be put to death for his own sin. There is a principle in the law of Moses that says, you do not pay for the sin of another. And you do not mete out punishment on another person just because of what's there. Jesus carries that further when he talks, and he'll say, if anyone causes one of these little ones to stumble, any one of these little ones to sin, better for him to have had a millstone tied around his neck and him to be thrown into the sea, right? Does God protect children? Yes. Do individuals have a right to life apart from people around them? Yes. I, as a person, have a right to life because I exist. Right? You don't have a right to take it. Period. Well, what about the death penalty? And that's another issue, right? I'll skirt that one tonight. No. I think that there is exception given. But believe it or not, I am not a government, and neither are you. And those are the exceptions that are given. The king has a right to make some of those decisions, but I don't, right? See, when I look at folks, I don't look at a way to put them to death. I look at a way to help them to live. That's what we're called to do. That's what we're called to be. It's at the heart of Christianity, is to help other folks live well, understanding that life is one of these things that God has given us. It's not simply just something. Go to Exodus chapter 4. In Exodus chapter 4, we come back and again sort of dealing with what it is that Moses has to say. In verse 10 it says, "But Moses said to the Lord, O my Lord, I am not eloquent, either in the past or since you have spoken to your servant, but I am slow of speech and of tongue. And then the Lord said to him, Who has made man's mouth? Who makes him mute or deaf or seeing or blind? Is it not I, the Lord?" When Moses says, you know what, God, I am not perfect, what does God tell Moses? I don't think we stop to think about this all the time, but Moses says, I don't speak real well. I'm not eloquent. I'm not ever. And God says, yeah, that's my fault. I did that. I make your mouth. And I know what I did. Go to John chapter 9. It's not the only place that God takes that on himself. In John chapter 9, verses 1 to 3, it says, as Jesus passed by, he saw a man blind from birth. And his disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? They said it must be sin. It's his own fault, right? Who sinned this man is born blind? Jesus answered, it was not this man, it was not that this man sinned or his parents, but that the works of God might be displayed in him. Who does Jesus say is responsible for the man's blindness? He says God is. God is vindictive. It makes people blind. It makes people... I don't think that's what he's saying. I do think, though, that what Jesus says is here to his disciples and what God says to Moses is there is value in the life that doesn't look like everyone else's. That it's not a matter of normal and abnormal. It's not a matter of defect and whole. It's not a matter of... It is a matter of God at work in an individual. That individual life has value because God gives it value. A person is a person because God has knit them together in the womb and has formed them in a way that bears His image. That God says, so we listen to those lies that say, but it's humane to... No, it's not. It is not ours to try to end run the work of God. It is not ours to say God cannot work in this life or that God cannot redeem those who look different than I do. It is not for us to make that decision. It is up to God to make that decision. Does that make sense? It is up to God to make that decision. When we talk about abortion and we come to the text, we have these things that point us to sanctity of life issues. We don't have King David dealt with abortion, what we have is an overriding principle that says life is valuable. Now, we do have in places like Jeremiah and Isaiah and in part of the minor prophets, the idea that killing children is an abomination. Okay? Because as part of worship to Molech, as part of worship to Moab, as part of worship to foreign deities, children were sacrificed on altars, and it's a horrendous practice. We have found graveyards full of children who died. I don't know if there's 41 million of them, but I know it's a bunch. God looks at life and the life of a child and says that life is sacred. And woe to you who do something to stand in the middle of that. There's an absolute warning by God to say, take this seriously. Be a part of what it is that goes on here. How we deal with physical life has eternal consequences. And that's just true. Am I my brother's keeper? Yeah, I am. I am my brother's keeper. In fact, we are the keepers of humanity itself. That we are called to see the world the way that God does. God does not wish that any should perish. Who do I wish would be dead? Abortion says, be easier if this person were dead. Or if that person was not here. Or if I could fix my problem in this way, right? It is one of those things that we have to stop and look. James says that true religion is this, that you care for the fatherless and the widow and the fatherless, the widow and the orphan, depending on your translation. Those who cannot care for themselves. We as Christians have to speak up about the sin of abortion because those are children, those are people who cannot speak for themselves. And so our action steps, I think, are clear. Start with an extra measure of compassion. I don't know who. I don't know what. I don't know how. I don't know that about some of the people that I come into contact with. But I do know this, that we have to make forgiveness and healing the goal here. That it is only in forgiveness and healing that we make a difference. That is for the young girl who goes in and seeks an abortion. She needs forgiveness for thinking about it. She needs healing. She needs a way to see that through, and she needs the compassion of the church in that place. That goes for the young lady who's walked out and has done the deed. She needs the same thing. That goes for the 40-year-old woman who did it 20 years ago. When we deal with the subject, we have to understand that this is sin. But we also have to understand that God forgives sin. And what our goal is forgiveness and healing for those who face these kind of decisions or those who think these kinds of thoughts, for those who would degrade a human life. We must speak the truth in love, Peter will say, with gentleness and respect. That it doesn't do us any good to yell and scream. What happens here, again, is amazing to me, is that what folks need more than anything else is they need someone to talk to about it. They need somebody to run their thoughts by. They need somebody who will guide them, somebody who will deal with them, somebody who will sit down and walk through the hard places with them. So we have to become a part of the process. So what's a part of the process? I'm not sure that it started at Roe versus Wade, but that's the beginning point for our discussion in the United States. And there is a legislative process that I think we have to take part in. That we have to make our votes and make our voices count by saying, no, we will not do that. We will not vote in systems that allow the wholesale slaughter of children. We will not be a part of that. We will give ourselves to stuff that works and stuff that makes a difference. We are blessed in Tomball to have the Tomball Pregnancy Center. It's one of our mission deals. If you've not been over there, you need to go over there just to see what it is that's going on. They do a wonderful job of sitting down with young women and young men and saying, you have options, and there are things that can be done, and there are things that could be different. Part of those options are keeping and raising a child yourself. Part of those options are keeping a child long enough for someone to adopt. I don't know if you've seen my family, but that's kind of the way we do things at my house. Walker was about 7. He said, I want a little brother. I said, cool. How, we get a baby and no. I want one that's about 6, somebody I can play baseball with. I said, well, I don't know that we can do that. He goes, well, that's the way it works in our family. I said, well, he's right. It's the way it works in our family. But we have to become part of the process. We have to find places to step in. We have to find places that call us to be who God has called us to be. I want you to remember that education has proven more beneficial and effective than legislation. There is an interesting statistic that that has come out about when abortion rates decline. They decline faster during blue presidencies than they do during red presidencies, and people are still trying to figure out what to do about that. We need to vote in such a way that represents what we do. But voting is one piece of that. We cannot go and vote and then say, my duty is done. I think we need to be educated on ways that we talk to folks. One of the great things about Tomball Pregnancy Center is that they train folks to talk to young ladies about abortion. And you can go over there and get trained. And then you can go over there and talk to young ladies. And you can go invite those ladies to church. And you can go have a significant impact in those places. All you got to do is be willing. They'll teach you what you need to know, and teaching more than anything else is what will benefit us and help us to be beneficial in that place. I do want you to vote, but don't think that that's the only thing that you got to do. I need us to remember that our struggle is not against flesh and blood. It is against things that are unseen, but that we know about. Wayne passed on an email to me from the pregnancy center, and I read it real quick because I read all the big stuff, Read all the big stuff and went, oh, it's from them, and I don't know. And I was out this afternoon, and I didn't get a chance to go look, and I sat down and went, what does this little piece say? This is where you come in. This is an advertisement. Thanks to ReproCare, the first digital abortion fund, you can directly fund online abortion services for people in need. 2 ways you can join us. Become a champion and ask 9 of your friends to donate $20 to fund an abortion. Donate any amount you can today. All donations of $20 and up will receive an I Help Fund an Abortion sticker. How's that for sanctity of life? All I can imagine is that in 6 weeks, how many I Help Fund an Abortion stickers are we going to find on the back of cars? There's a thought process here that's evil. There is something that's going on here. This doesn't mean that we go out and hunt down abortion doctors. My battle's not against flesh and blood. There's a thought process here. And the thought process that changes this is to understand that God gives value to all life and that life begins at conception. Right? Hope casting. Abortions have been steadily declining since 1990. That's a fact. You can look at any figure, any place, no matter how they view it, and abortions have been declining. 600,000 is too many. We won't be happy until it's 0. But understand that there's been a significant decline in the last 30 years, and that trends look like it will continue that way. There was a spike in 2018, and we don't know about 19 and 20, but it didn't go up much. But I think that the idea of declining is there, and I think that brings us hope. The other thing I think brings us hope is that Christians have been and will continue to be on the front lines of the issue. That when we talk about something that the church has really stood up for, it is to stand up and say, this is wrong. And when we talk about colliding with abortion in our culture, this is something that Christians have done. How many of you have ever driven by an abortion clinic and seen a group out there that is praying over that, or we've taken to the streets, we've taken to places like the pregnancy center, we're taken to, well, Bill, those are other folks, and I get it. But there are places that we can stand up, places that we can be counted, and I think that it's an important issue for us to look and say, how can I voice my opinion? How can I voice the truth about what is it goes on here with gentleness and respect and in love, the way that God would call it to be. We have a huge number of resources in Houston to be able to step up and have something to say and something to do about it. But again, it is a question about how we see life and how we share life with other folks. So, I'm over. Tonight, God calls us into relationship. And I think that's one of the things about life that is so important. Is that every life that lives is a life that comes before God and that God cherishes. That God cherishes who we are and what we are, no matter what state we're in. God delights in His people and desires man to live in a relationship. God wants us to have a life and to have a life that is abundant. And so God calls us to Him. The idea that we value life is an expression of the heart of God. God values you. God wants you in relationship. God wants you when you're broken. God wants you to forgive you. God wants you to grow you. God wants you tonight. So if you need to respond to the invitation, we'd invite you to come forward now as we stand and as we sing.